February 1st, 2026, Tucson, Arizona. The sun has not yet risen. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood is quiet in that particular way that desert communities are quiet in the hours before dawn, a stillness broken only by the occasional sound of a car engine starting, a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of wind moving through the mesquite and palo verde trees that line the residential streets. Nancy Guthrie is asleep in her home. She is 84 years old. She lives alone in a single-story house that she has made her own over the years she has lived in Tucson. The home is comfortable, well-maintained, filled with the accumulated markers of a life lived, photographs of her daughters and grandchildren, books she has read, furniture she has chosen. It is the kind of home where routines matter, where medications are taken on schedule, where the days follow a predictable rhythm that brings comfort and stability. Nancy is not famous. She has not built a public life. She has no enemies that anyone who knows her can identify. She is a retired educator, a woman who spent her career teaching, shaping young minds, contributing to her community in the quiet, essential way that teachers do. She is a mother to two daughters, Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, and Annie Guthrie Caldwell. She is a grandmother. She is the kind of woman whose neighbors wave to her from across the street and actually mean it, whose presence in the community is taken for granted in the best possible sense. She is there, she is part of the fabric of the neighborhood, and her disappearance would leave a hole that people would notice immediately. And in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, someone comes for her. Not randomly, not impulsively, not out of desperation or drunken rage or the kind of spontaneous violence that investigators can sometimes begin to understand within the first 48 hours. Someone comes for Nancy Guthrie specifically, deliberately, with planning that suggests he has been thinking about this moment for weeks, possibly months, with equipment, with a level of preparation that speaks to obsession, to compulsion, to a motivation so powerful that it overrides every rational warning signal that should have turned him around before he ever reached her front door. He stands at that front door, wearing at least one mask, possibly 2 layers of face covering. He is wearing at least 1 pair of gloves, possibly 2 pairs layered one over the other. He is wearing what appears to be a full-body suit, a layer of protective covering over his regular clothing, the kind of precaution that someone takes when they understand, at least intellectually, that they are about to enter an environment where they will leave biological evidence. He is carrying a backpack, specifically a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a model sold at Walmart stores across the country, a pack with reflective bands that catch whatever ambient light the pre-dawn darkness offers. He has what appears to be a holster on his hip, and in his hand, visible in one frame of the surveillance footage that will later be recovered from Nancy's doorbell camera, there is an object that experts will debate. Some will say it looks like a Wi-Fi jamming device. Others will argue it appears to be a handheld radio antenna, a two-way communication device that would imply someone else is involved, someone waiting, someone watching, someone on the other end of that transmission coordinating the operation, and he stays. This is the detail that behavioral analysts will return to again and again when they review this case. He stays inside that house for 41 minutes. 41 minutes inside an occupied dwelling with an 84-year-old woman who, by every indication, is not cooperating voluntarily. 41 minutes during which anything could go wrong. A neighbor could notice something unusual. A car could pull into the driveway. Nancy could trigger an alarm that he doesn't know about. The doorbell camera, which he attempts to cover with brush from Nancy's yard, could capture more footage than he realizes. Every second he spends inside that house is another opportunity for the entire operation to collapse, and yet he stays for 41 minutes. When he finally leaves, Nancy Guthrie leaves with him. Her blood is found on the front porch, evidence of violence, evidence that she resisted or was injured during the abduction. The front door is open. Her car is in the driveway. Her purse is inside. Her keys are inside. Her medications, the prescriptions she takes daily without fail, are inside. Everything that would indicate she left voluntarily is absent. And in the more than 40 days since that night, not a single arrest has been made. What you are about to hear is not a summary of news coverage you can find anywhere else. This is not a recap of headlines. This is a full investigation into the mind of the person who did this, into the evidence he left behind, evidence he may not even realize he left, into the behavioral profile that is being constructed around him by experts who have spent their careers studying the psychology of obsession, compulsion, and violence, into the investigative machinery, forensic genetic genealogy, traffic camera analysis, behavioral pattern recognition that is working right now, quietly, methodically, to close the circle around him, and into the one question that everyone following this case, from Tucson to New York to every corner of the country, is asking. Where is Nancy Guthrie right now? Is she alive? Is she being held somewhere? Can she be brought home? Stay with me, because the answer may be closer than anyone has been allowed to say out loud. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at Forensic Disconnect, we go deeper than the headlines. We examine the evidence, the investigative procedures, and the human stories behind cases that deserve to be remembered. New investigations every week. Before we examine the evidence and the profile, before we look at what those 41 minutes inside Nancy's home tell us about who this person is and what he wanted, we need to understand the context in which this case exists. Because Nancy Guthrie does not exist in isolation. She exists at the edge of a much more public world, the world inhabited by her daughter, Savannah. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. She co-anchors NBC's Today Show, a program that has been a fixture of American morning routines for decades, a show that millions of people turn on as they prepare for their day, as they drink their coffee, as they get their children ready for school. Savannah's voice, her presence, her interviews with presidents and celebrities and ordinary people whose stories deserve to be told have become part of the daily rhythm of American life. She is known. She is trusted. She is, in the truest sense of the word, a public figure. And public figures, by the nature of their visibility, attract attention that goes beyond the normal boundaries of admiration or professional respect. They attract obsession. They attract individuals who construct entire fantasy narratives around them, individuals who believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that they have a relationship with the public figure, that the public figure knows them, thinks about them, cares about them in some way that transcends the one-way nature of media consumption. This is not a new phenomenon. It has been studied extensively by forensic psychologists, by law enforcement behavioral analysts, by security professionals who work to protect public figures from the small percentage of admirers who cross the line from fan to threat. The clinical term for this condition is erotomania, a delusional belief that another person, usually someone of higher social status, is in love with the individual experiencing the delusion. But the manifestation of that delusion can take many forms. It can be romantic. It can be protective, a belief that the public figure needs to be rescued or saved from some perceived threat. It can be adversarial, a conviction that the public figure has wronged the individual in some way and must be made to understand, to acknowledge, to atone. And when the public figure, as they inevitably must, fails to acknowledge the individual, fails to fulfill the role that has been assigned to them in the delusion, the frustration builds. The compulsion to act, to force acknowledgement, to insert oneself into the public figure's life in a way that cannot be ignored, becomes overwhelming. And the action taken is often directed not at the public figure themselves. That would be too direct, too risky, too likely to result in immediate arrest, but at someone close to them, a family member, a loved one, someone who's suffering, whose absence, whose peril will force the public figure to feel what the individual wants them to feel, to think about the individual constantly, to exist in the emotional state that validates the fantasy that has been constructed. Nancy Guthrie in this framework was not selected because of anything she did, anything she said, any action she took. Nancy Guthrie was selected because of who her daughter is, because taking Nancy, causing Savannah pain, forcing Savannah into a state of public grief and private agony, inserts the individual responsible into Savannah's emotional world in a way that watching her on television never could. It makes him, in his distorted perception, the most important person in Savannah's life, the person she thinks about when she wakes up, the person she thinks about when she goes to sleep, the center of her emotional existence. This is the theory that retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente has put forward based on his analysis of the evidence in this case. And to understand why that theory carries weight, we need to understand who Jim Clemente is and what his analysis is based on. Jim Clemente spent 22 years with the FBI. He worked in the Behavioral Analysis Unit, the division of the bureau responsible for criminal profiling, for understanding the psychology of offenders in cases where motivation is unclear, where the connection between victim and offender is not immediately apparent, where the crime itself seems to defy rational explanation. He worked on cases involving serial killers, child abductors, sexual predators, individuals operating from places of profound psychological disturbance. He developed expertise in understanding how obsession manifests in criminal behavior, how fantasy drives action, how individuals who exist outside the boundaries of normal psychological functioning justify their actions to themselves. And when Jim Clemente reviewed the surveillance footage from Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera, when he examined the timeline of the abduction, when he considered the level of planning involved and the extraordinary risk the offender accepted, his analysis pointed to a specific psychological profile. A profile that, if accurate, tells us not just who this person might be demographically, but what drives him, what mistakes he is likely to have made, and what behavioral changes people around him should be noticing right now. Let's build that profile, step by step, detail by detail, because the answer to where Nancy Guthrie is right now may depend on understanding who took her and why. The surveillance footage from Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera is, in many ways, the foundation of this entire investigation. It is the only visual record of the person who took her. And while the footage is brief, while the individual is wearing a mask and took precautions to obscure his identity, the footage contains more information than he may have realized when he stood at that door in the early hours of February 1st. The footage was retrieved by the FBI working in coordination with Google, the company that manufactures and operates the Nest camera system. This retrieval itself is noteworthy. Nancy Guthrie did not have a cloud storage subscription for her Nest camera. Under normal circumstances, without that subscription, video footage from a Nest camera is not stored remotely. It exists only temporarily on the camera itself before being overwritten by new footage. But the FBI, working with Google's technical team, was able to recover the footage anyway. The specific technical process by which this was accomplished has not been made public. Google and the FBI do not typically disclose the details of their forensic data recovery capabilities, but the fact that it was possible tells us something important. Even when individuals believe they have taken precautions to avoid leaving a digital trail, law enforcement has tools and partnerships that can recover evidence that the offender assumed was gone. The footage shows a figure approaching Nancy's front door. The timestamp on the footage, synchronized with Nancy's doorbell system, places the approach at approximately 2:12 a.m. The figure is wearing a mask that covers the lower half of his face. Some analysts who have reviewed the footage believe there may be a second layer of covering, possibly a medical mask beneath a cloth mask, creating multiple barriers between the camera and his face. But despite these precautions, details are visible. His eyebrows are visible above the mask. They appear to be dark, possibly black or dark brown. The shape and thickness of eyebrows are, to a trained observer, identifying features. They are difficult to disguise without drawing attention in everyday life, and they are captured clearly enough in this footage that someone who knows this individual, who has seen him without a mask in normal circumstances, would recognize them. Below the mask, there is what appears to be facial hair, a mustache. Again, while the lower face is covered, the presence of the mustache is suggested by the way the mask sits, by the subtle visual cues that indicate hair beneath the fabric. It is not conclusive, but it is consistent, and it is another data point. His hands are covered with black gloves. But gloves, like masks, can reveal as much as they conceal if the wearer is not careful. And in one frame of the footage, as the figure moves, as he reaches toward the doorbell camera in what appears to be an attempt to obstruct or disable it, his right wrist is briefly exposed. The sleeve of his jacket rides up slightly, and in that moment, there is visible what appears to be a marking on the underside of his right wrist, a tattoo. Jim Clemente, reviewing this footage, noted this detail specifically. He stated publicly, in interviews with Fox News and News Nation, that he believes the marking is a tattoo. The specific design of the tattoo is not clear from the footage. The image is too brief, the resolution too limited to make out fine details. But the presence of a tattoo on the underside of the right wrist is, in itself, a significant identifying feature. It is a detail that cannot be easily hidden in everyday life. It is visible when someone reaches for something, when they use their hands, when they interact with objects and people in normal circumstances. Someone who knows this individual has seen that tattoo. And if that person were to see the surveillance footage, were to focus on that specific frame, they might recognize it. The figure is wearing a backpack. Not just any backpack, but a specific model, a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. This is a brand sold primarily at Walmart. The pack has reflective bands, strips of material designed to catch light and make the wearer more visible in low-light conditions, an ironic detail given the context. The specific size, 25 liters, is not a common size. It is not the largest backpack Ozark Trail makes, nor the smallest. It is a mid-range capacity pack, large enough to carry equipment but not so large as to be cumbersome. The choice of this specific pack may have been deliberate, or it may have been a matter of availability, of what was on sale at a local Walmart in the days or weeks before the abduction, but it is traceable. Walmart tracks sales. Credit card purchases can be traced. If this individual purchased this pack recently, there may be a digital trail that investigators can follow. The figure appears to have a holster on his hip. The holster is visible in the footage, positioned in a way that some experts have described as atypical for someone carrying concealed in a civilian context. The positioning suggests either someone with law enforcement or military training, someone who has been trained to carry a weapon in a specific way, or someone who is imitating that positioning without fully understanding the mechanics of it. This detail has led some analysts to speculate that the individual may have a background in law enforcement or military service, while others believe he may be someone who has consumed enough media depictions of tactical operations that he is mimicking what he has seen without actual training. And then there is the object in his hand. In one frame of the footage, there is visible what appears to be a handheld device. The device has what looks like an antenna extending from it. The initial speculation, fueled by reports from neighbors that their internet connections and ring cameras experienced disruptions around the time of Nancy's disappearance, was that this might be a Wi-Fi jamming device. Wi-Fi jammers are illegal in the United States, but they are available for purchase online, often marketed as privacy protection tools or security testing equipment. They work by emitting radio frequency signals that interfere with the signals used by Wi-Fi routers and Bluetooth devices, effectively creating a dead zone where wireless communications cannot function. If the individual used such a device, it would explain why some cameras in the neighborhood failed to capture footage during the critical window when Nancy was taken. But other experts, reviewing the same footage, have argued that the device looks more like a two-way radio, a walkie-talkie. The antenna, they point out, is consistent with handheld radios used for short-range communication. And if that interpretation is correct, it raises a different and potentially more significant question. Was there someone else involved? Was there a second person, positioned somewhere nearby, coordinating with the individual at the door, providing lookout services ready to intervene if something went wrong? A two-way radio implies a communication partner, and a communication partner implies that this may not have been a solo operation. The figure stands at the door for several seconds. Then, in what appears to be a moment of recognition that he is being recorded, he moves. He steps out of the immediate frame of the camera. He reaches down and grabs what looks like brush or small branches from Nancy's yard. He attempts to obscure the camera with this vegetation, and in the process of doing so, he reveals his wrist. The tattoo. The mistake. Jim Clemente has spoken about this moment specifically. He has described it as a classic example of how offenders, even those who plan meticulously, make critical errors under stress. The individual knew the camera was there. He attempted to deal with it. But his solution, grabbing brush to block the lens, was improvised, reactive, not part of his original plan. And in that improvised moment, he exposed a piece of identifying information that he had otherwise successfully concealed. The footage ends shortly after this. The individual, having attempted to block the camera, proceeds into Nancy's home. What happens next is not captured on video. But we know from the timeline that investigators have constructed that he stays inside for 41 minutes. And we know from the evidence found at the scene that when he leaves, Nancy leaves with him. 41 minutes. This is the number that Jim Clemente returns to repeatedly in his analysis. 41 minutes inside an occupied home. To understand why this matters, why this single detail tells us so much about who this person is and what motivated him, we need to understand how criminal risk assessment works. In the field of behavioral analysis, every criminal act can be evaluated along a spectrum of risk. Low-risk crimes are those conducted in environments where the offender has control, where the chance of interruption is minimal, where the variables are known and manageable. High-risk crimes are those conducted in environments where the offender has little control, where unexpected variables are likely, where the possibility of discovery or intervention is significant. Entering an occupied home falls into the highest category of risk. The victim is in their own environment, an environment they know intimately. They know where the doors are, where the windows are, where potential weapons might be located, where panic buttons or alarm systems might be installed. The offender, by contrast, is on foreign ground. He does not know the layout. He does not know what security measures are in place. He does not know if the victim is alone, if there are other people in the house, if neighbors are likely to notice unusual sounds or lights. Every minute he spends inside is another 60 seconds during which the entire operation could fall apart. Most criminals, even experienced ones, avoid occupied homes for exactly this reason. The risk is too high. The variables are too unpredictable. And yet this individual did not avoid it. He entered an occupied home, and he stayed for 41 minutes. According to Clemente's analysis, this tells us something fundamental about motivation. It tells us that whatever drove this individual to take Nancy Guthrie was not incidental. It was not opportunistic. It was not a crime of convenience or a split-second decision made under the influence of drugs or alcohol. This was someone operating from a place of extreme psychological compulsion, someone for whom the reward of what he came to do was powerful enough to override every rational warning signal that should have turned him around. That kind of compulsion has a source. And in cases where an 84-year-old woman with no apparent enemies, no involvement in criminal activity, no reason to be targeted for financial gain is abducted from her home, the source of that compulsion is often psychological rather than practical. It is often rooted in fantasy, in obsession, in a distorted belief system that has been building over time. And when you combine that compulsion with the fact that Nancy Guthrie's daughter is a public figure, the profile that emerges is consistent with what behavioral analysts call an erotomanic stalker or a celebrity fixation offender. These are individuals who develop an obsessive attachment to a public figure. The attachment is not based in reality. It is not reciprocated. The public figure typically has no idea that the individual exists. But in the mind of the offender, the relationship is real. It is intense. It is consuming. And when reality intrudes, when the public figure does not acknowledge them, does not respond to them, does not fulfill the role that has been assigned to them in the fantasy, the frustration becomes unbearable. The compulsion to act, to force acknowledgement, to insert themselves into the public figure's emotional world becomes overwhelming, and the action they take is often directed at someone close to the public figure, a family member, a loved one, someone whose suffering will generate the emotional response that the offender craves. In this framework, Nancy Guthrie was not the target. She was the vehicle, the means through which the offender could force Savannah Guthrie to acknowledge him, to think about him, to exist in the emotional state that validates his fantasy. Her disappearance generates media coverage. It causes Savannah pain. It forces Savannah to be publicly vulnerable in a way that she would never be under normal circumstances. And all of that attention, all of that emotion, all of that public display of grief centers around the action that he took. It makes him, in his distorted perception, the most important person in Savannah's life. If this profile is accurate, and Jim Clemente's career suggests that his assessments carry significant weight, then several predictions follow. The offender is likely male. The overwhelming majority of erotomanic stalkers are male, particularly when the target of the obsession is female. He is likely in his 30s or 40s. This age range is consistent with individuals who have had time to develop a sustained obsession, but who have not yet reached an age where physical capability or opportunity would be significantly diminished. He is likely from the Tucson area or has a documented connection to it. The level of familiarity with Nancy's neighborhood, the ability to move through it with enough confidence to spend 41 minutes inside her home, suggests local knowledge. He is not a professional criminal. He does not have extensive experience evading law enforcement. The operation he conducted, while showing signs of planning, also showed signs of amateurism. He was startled by the doorbell camera. He improvised a solution that exposed his wrist. He spent 41 minutes inside a high-risk environment, leaving biological evidence with every breath he took. A professional would have been faster, more efficient, more aware of the forensic implications of extended exposure. And perhaps most importantly, his behavior in the days and weeks following February 1st will have changed in ways that people around him can see. This is not speculation. This is based on decades of research into how offenders, particularly those operating from psychological compulsion rather than criminal professionalism, respond to the stress of having committed a major crime. They do not simply return to normal life and continue as if nothing happened. The stress manifests. It shows in their behavior. And people who know them notice. Jim Clemente has spoken about this publicly. He has described the specific behavioral changes that people should be looking for. Unexplained absences from work or social obligations, calling in sick repeatedly, backing out of commitments, becoming unavailable in ways that are unusual for that individual, heightened stress or anxiety, irritability, difficulty sleeping. Obsessive monitoring of news coverage about the case, watching every report, reading every article, following every social media discussion, checking constantly for updates, unusual interest in discussions about Nancy Guthrie or Savannah Guthrie, bringing up the case in conversation when it is not relevant, asking questions about the investigation, expressing opinions about what might have happened in ways that seem overly invested. These are not subtle changes. These are shifts in behavior significant enough that a spouse, a roommate, a coworker, a neighbor, a family member would notice. They are the kind of changes that make people think something is wrong, even if they cannot articulate exactly what it is. And somewhere right now, someone is sitting with that observation. Someone has noticed that a person they know has been acting differently since February 1st. They have noticed that his behavior has changed in ways that feel connected to this case. But they are not sure. They are not sure if what they are noticing is significant. They are not sure if they should say something. They are worried about being wrong, about causing problems for someone who might be innocent, about overreacting to what might be nothing. Jim Clemente's message to that person is direct and unambiguous. Trust your instincts. If someone you know has been acting differently since February 1st, if their behavior has changed in ways that feel connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, that information could be the key to bringing her home. Call the FBI. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Submit an anonymous tip if you prefer. But do not dismiss what you are noticing. Do not talk yourself out of it. Because you may be the person who has the piece of information that solves this case. The DNA evidence in this case is, according to multiple experts who have reviewed the publicly available information, likely to be the factor that ultimately leads to an arrest. And the reason for that confidence is simple. The individual spent 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home. He was breathing. He was moving. He was touching surfaces. He was existing in an enclosed environment. And despite the precautions he took, despite the mask and the gloves and the bodysuit, he left biological evidence behind. Jim Clemente has been explicit about this. He has stated publicly that he believes the offender's DNA is all over Nancy's house. The mask covered his mouth and nose, but it did not create a hermetic seal. With every breath he took, he exhaled moisture. That moisture contains cells. Those cells contain DNA. They settle on surfaces. They can be recovered. The mask also exposed his eyes, his eyebrows, his eyelashes. These areas shed cells constantly. In the normal course of human biology, we lose thousands of cells every day. In a situation of stress, of heightened activity, of 41 minutes spent moving through a space, the rate of cell loss increases. Those cells too can be recovered. The gloves protected his hands from leaving fingerprints, but gloves can tear, can shift, can expose small areas of skin when the wearer is not paying attention. And even if the gloves remained intact, the fact that he touched surfaces while wearing them means that transfer evidence, fibers from the gloves, particles from whatever he was carrying, may have been deposited. All of this biological and trace evidence has been collected by investigators. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has confirmed that DNA was recovered from the scene. That DNA is being analyzed, and if it can be matched to a profile, if that profile can be connected to a name, the investigation will have its breakthrough. But here is the challenge. DNA is only useful if there is something to compare it to. If the offender's DNA is already in a law enforcement database, if he has a prior criminal record that required DNA submission, the match will be immediate. But if he does not have a prior record, if his DNA is not in the system, then investigators need another approach. And that approach is forensic genetic genealogy. Forensic genetic genealogy is the technique that has revolutionized cold case investigations in recent years. It is the technique that led to the identification of the Golden State Killer after decades of his crimes remaining unsolved. It is the technique that has been used to solve hundreds of cases that law enforcement had given up hope of ever resolving. The process works like this. Investigators take the DNA profile from the crime scene and upload it to public genealogy databases. These are databases like GED Match and Family Tree DNA, platforms where people voluntarily submit their DNA for ancestry research, for finding relatives, for building family trees. When the crime scene DNA is uploaded to these databases, the system searches for genetic matches. It looks for people who share enough DNA with the crime scene profile to be relatives, cousins, second cousins, third cousins. The more distant the relationship, the less DNA is shared. But even distant relationships can be identified if the database is large enough and the matches are strong enough. Once potential relatives are identified, genealogists go to work. They build family trees. They trace lineages back through generations. They identify common ancestors. They narrow down the pool of individuals who could have left the DNA at the crime scene. They look at age, at geography, at any other factors that can be used to eliminate or prioritize candidates, and eventually, if the process works, they arrive at a name. This process takes time. It is not instantaneous. Building a family tree through multiple generations, verifying records, cross-referencing data, all of this requires expertise and patience. But it works. And in a case where the offender has left as much biological evidence as this individual appears to have left in Nancy Guthrie's home, the chances of success are high. The FBI has not publicly stated whether they are pursuing forensic genetic genealogy in this case, but given the circumstances, it would be an obvious and logical step. The technology exists, the databases exist, the expertise exists. And if the offender has any relatives who have used ancestry services and uploaded their results to public databases, there is a very real possibility that he can be identified through this method. But genealogy is not the only investigative track being pursued. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are conducting an investigation of extraordinary scale and scope. More than 10,000 hours of video footage from traffic cameras, from Ring doorbells, from business security systems have been reviewed. Think about what that means. 10,000 hours. That is the equivalent of watching video continuously for more than 400 days. Investigators are not watching it continuously, of course. They are using software to help identify vehicles, to track movement patterns, to flag anything that appears unusual or relevant. But even with software assistance, the task is enormous. They are looking for the car that left Nancy's neighborhood in the early hours of February 1st with her inside it. They are analyzing hundreds of thousands of vehicles, looking for patterns, looking for matches, looking for anything that connects to other pieces of evidence. One car in particular has been mentioned in media reports. A vehicle was spotted on camera approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 a.m. That is just minutes after the timeline suggests Nancy was taken. The vehicle is being investigated. Authorities have not said whether it has been definitively connected to the case, but the fact that it is being mentioned suggests it is considered significant. Investigators are also tracing the Ozark Trail backpack. Walmart tracks sales through its inventory system. If the backpack was purchased with a credit card, there is a record. If it was purchased with cash, there may still be security camera footage from the store. The specific model, the 25-liter hiker pack with reflective bands, is not the most common model. That specificity narrows the search. Walmart can identify which stores carried that specific model, when it was in stock, when units were sold. If the backpack was purchased recently, in the Tucson area, that purchase can potentially be traced back to an individual. The investigation is also reviewing behavioral profiles. The FBI maintains databases of individuals who have demonstrated fixation on public figures, threatening letters, obsessive social media contact, showing up at events uninvited. Any documented behavior that suggests an unhealthy level of attention directed at Savannah Guthrie or even at Nancy Guthrie herself is being reviewed. Names are being cross-referenced with other data. Do any of these individuals live in the Tucson area? Do any of them match the physical description visible in the surveillance footage? Do any of them have tattoos on their right wrist? These are the questions investigators are asking. And then there are the tips. The Guthrie family offered a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. That reward generated an immediate response. Approximately 1,500 tips were received by the FBI in the days following the reward announcement. More than 750 of those tips were deemed credible. That is a 50% credibility rate, which is actually quite high for tip lines in major cases. It suggests that people are paying attention, that they are thinking carefully before calling, that they may have real information. Every one of those credible tips is being followed up. Names are being checked. Alibis are being verified. Information is being cross-referenced with other evidence. This is slow work. It is methodical work. But it is the kind of work that solves cases. And somewhere in that pile of tips, there may be the piece of information that connects everything else together. On February 13th, almost 2 weeks after Nancy's disappearance, the FBI and SWAT units conducted a coordinated operation in a neighborhood approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. The aerial footage of that operation was striking. Tactical vehicles, uniformed agents moving through residential streets. The level of force suggested that this was not a routine inquiry. A man was detained. His home was searched. He was held for several hours before being released without charges. The Pima County Sheriff's Office confirmed publicly that he was not identified as a suspect. Law enforcement did not comment on the specific reason for the search. But the fact that it happened, the scale at which it happened, tells us something. It tells us that investigators had a specific reason to focus on that individual, on that location, at that time. It tells us that they had information, whether from tips or from their own investigative work, that justified deploying SWAT resources. It tells us that this investigation is active, that leads are being pursued aggressively, and that when investigators believe they have something solid, they are willing to move quickly and decisively. The fact that the individual was released, that no charges were filed, does not mean the operation was a failure or a waste of resources. Investigations often involve checking and eliminating possibilities. Sometimes the person who looks promising on paper turns out to have an alibi that checks out. Sometimes the evidence that seemed significant turns out to have an innocent explanation. That is normal. That is how investigations work. But the operation also sent a message. It sent a message to the person who took Nancy Guthrie. It told him that law enforcement is not waiting passively for him to make a mistake. They are actively hunting. They are following leads. They are willing to show up at doors, to search homes, to detain people for questioning. And that pressure, that knowledge that investigators are closing in, creates stress, and stress creates mistakes. Throughout this entire investigation, one statement has been repeated over and over, and it is a statement that carries more weight the more you understand about how these cases typically unfold. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has said, publicly and on the record, that he personally believes Nancy Guthrie is alive. He has said it in multiple interviews. He has said it to media outlets. He has said it directly and without hedging. This is not the kind of statement that law enforcement officials make lightly. Sheriffs and investigators are typically very careful about managing expectations in missing persons cases, particularly cases that involve elderly victims, particularly cases where blood evidence suggests violence. The default position, the safe position, is to say that the investigation is ongoing, that all possibilities are being explored, that no conclusions have been reached. But Sheriff Nanos has not taken that position. He has chosen to state, as his personal belief, that Nancy is alive. Why would he say that? What does he know? What does the evidence suggest that would lead him to that conclusion? The answer may lie in the behavioral profile itself. If this is an erotomanic stalker, if the goal was not to harm Nancy, but to use her as a means of forcing Savannah to acknowledge the offender's existence, then keeping Nancy alive serves that purpose far more effectively than killing her would. A murder generates media coverage, yes. It generates grief and pain, but it also has a resolution. It has closure. As terrible as that closure might be, the family knows what happened. They can mourn. They can begin, however slowly, to move forward. But a disappearance with no resolution, a situation where Nancy is missing, but there is hope that she could be alive, that she could be recovered, keeps Savannah in a state of suspended agony. She cannot mourn because she does not know if her mother is dead. She cannot move forward because there is always the possibility that today might be the day when news comes. She exists in a state of constant emotional engagement with the situation, constantly thinking about her mother, constantly wondering, constantly hoping. And all of that emotional energy, all of that attention, all of that public vulnerability centers around the action that the offender took. In his distorted perception, that makes him the center of Savannah's world. It validates his importance in a way that nothing else could. If this analysis is correct, then the offender has a vested interest in keeping Nancy alive, in maintaining the uncertainty, in prolonging the situation for as long as possible. And Sheriff Nanos, looking at the evidence, looking at the behavioral profile, may believe that this is exactly what is happening. Does that mean Nancy is definitely alive? No. Behavioral profiles are not guarantees. They are educated assessments based on patterns and probabilities, but they are not infallible. The offender may not be acting rationally according to the profile. Events may have unfolded in ways that were not planned. Nancy may have been injured during the abduction in ways that were not intended. There are many variables. But the fact that Sheriff Nanos is willing to state his belief publicly suggests that he sees evidence, whether in the behavioral profile or in details of the investigation that have not been made public, that supports the possibility that Nancy is alive and can be recovered. The Guthrie family has been living through what can only be described as a nightmare. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show studio on March 5th, more than a month after her mother's disappearance. It was her first visit to the studio since Nancy was taken. She was greeted by her co-workers with tears and embraces. She described the visit as a step, a small movement toward resuming some semblance of normal life. But she made it clear that her priority, her focus, remains bringing her mother home. On her Instagram account, Savannah posted a message thanking people for their prayers and support. The message ended with a sentence that speaks to the family's state of mind. Bring her home. Not tell us what happened to her. Not help us find justice. Bring her home. Present tense. Active. The family, despite everything, despite the blood on the porch and the 40-plus days of silence, is holding to the belief that Nancy can be recovered alive. And they are backed in that belief by the sheriff leading the investigation. On March 2nd, Savannah and her sister Annie visited their mother's home in Tucson. They placed flowers at the memorial that has grown outside the house. They left a card. The card, which was photographed by media, read in part, "Though we are surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, our love burns bright. We love you, Mommy. We miss you so much." The image of Savannah Guthrie, a woman who interviews world leaders and handles breaking news with professional composure, standing at her mother's home in visible grief, is a reminder that this is not an abstract case. This is not a puzzle to be solved or a mystery to be discussed. This is a family in agony, a daughter who does not know if her mother is alive or dead, a grandmother whose grandchildren are waiting for her to come home. Real people, real pain, real stakes. If you have any information about this case, if you have noticed anything unusual, if you recognize anything in the surveillance footage, if you know someone whose behavior has changed since February 1st in ways that feel connected to this case, please contact authorities. The FBI can be reached at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. The Pima County Sheriff's Department can be reached at 520-351-4900. The FBI also operates an online tip portal at tips.fbi.gov, where tips can be submitted anonymously. The Guthrie family's $1 million reward remains active for information that leads to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. You may know something without realizing its significance. You may have seen something in the days before or after February 1st that seemed unusual at the time, but that you dismissed. You may know someone who owns a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack with reflective bands. You may know someone with a tattoo on the underside of their right wrist. You may know someone who has been obsessively following news coverage of this case. You may know someone who has been absent from work, who has been acting stressed or anxious in ways that are unusual for them, who has been asking questions about the investigation that seem overly invested. That information could be the piece that breaks this case open. There is a man out there right now who spent 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home, who believed he was invisible, who thought he had planned for every contingency, but he made mistakes. He left DNA on every surface he touched, in every breath he exhaled. He revealed a tattoo on his wrist. He was captured on camera. He exists in a behavioral pattern that has shifted dramatically enough since February 1st that people around him have noticed, even if they are not sure what it means. And somewhere in the vast matrix of investigative activity currently underway, forensic analysis, genetic genealogy, traffic camera review, tip follow-up, behavioral profiling, there is a thread that connects to him, a piece of DNA that matches a family tree, a vehicle captured on a traffic camera at the wrong time, a tip from someone who recognized something in the surveillance footage, a coworker who noticed that he has been acting strangely, a family member who saw a backpack in his car that matches the description, a detail, small in itself, that when combined with other details creates a picture, creates a name, creates an arrest. The circle is closing. Investigations like this, investigations that involve this level of resources, this level of expertise, this level of public attention, do not go unsolved indefinitely. Mistakes were made. Evidence was left. And evidence has a way of revealing the truth. No matter how much time passes, Nancy Guthrie is out there. And this investigation, with all of its technological capabilities, with all of its behavioral insights, with all of its human determination to bring her home, is moving toward resolution. This is not just a story. This is a real woman, a real family, a real ongoing investigation. And the person responsible, the person who thought he could do this and disappear into obscurity, is running out of time. If this case matters to you, subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who might have information. Drop your thoughts in the comments, but remember to be respectful. These are real people living through an unimaginable nightmare. What do you think happened on February 1st? What do you think the evidence is telling us? Do you believe Nancy is still alive? And if you know something, anything at all, say something. Call the FBI, call the sheriff's department, submit an anonymous tip. Because Nancy Guthrie deserves to be brought home. Her family deserves answers. And the person who took her deserves to face justice. The 41 minutes he spent in that house, the mistakes he made, the evidence he left behind, all of it is working against him now. And somewhere, someone knows who he is. Someone has noticed the changes. Someone has the piece of information that will bring this to an end. That someone might be you.